The war had been going on for 300 years, 300 long bloody years that had turned entire star systems into graveyards. Commander Jiho Park pressed his face against the cold glass of the observation deck, watching distant explosions light up the darkness of space like deadly fireworks. Each flash meant another world was dying. The diplomatic vessel Harmony drifted silently through the void, carrying humanity's latest attempt at peace. But Jiho already knew what the answer would be. It was always the same answer. "Sir, they rejected our proposal again," Lieutenant Mina Kim said softly, her shoulders sagging with defeat. She had been so hopeful this time, so sure that someone would finally listen to reason. But the Valerian Empire and the Nexus Coalition had both sent back the same message they always did. Humans were too primitive to understand real warfare. Jiho felt his hands curl into fists. For 8 months now, Earth had been sending peace, envoys to both sides. 8 months of careful negotiations, detailed ceasefire proposals and offers to mediate talks. The response was always laughter. The aliens thought humans were nothing more than cave dwellers who had somehow stumbled into space travel. The Valerians were an ancient race, their empire spanning 1,000 star systems. They had technology that could crack planets in half, and ships the size of small moons. Their warriors had been fighting for so long that war was all they knew. Honor meant everything to them, and surrendering meant eternal shame. The Nexus Coalition was just as old and just as proud. They had evolved from a species of hive-minded insects who had learned to think as individuals, but still moved like a single organism in battle. Their bioships could heal themselves mid-fight, and their weapons used living creatures as ammunition. Both sides had been killing each other for centuries, and the rest of the galaxy had learned to stay out of their way. Entire trade routes had been abandoned. Peaceful species had fled to the far edges of known space. The war had become a fact of life, as permanent as gravity or the speed of light. They called us adorable little mammals in their response. Mina continued reading from her tablet. The Valerian ambassador said we should go back to our little corner of space and play with our primitive toys. Jiho turned away from the window. Behind him, the bridge of the Harmony hummed with quiet activity. The crew moved with purpose, but he could see the frustration in their movements. These were good people, diplomats and peacekeepers who genuinely believed that every war could be ended with the right words and enough patience. "What about the coalition?" Jiho asked, though he already knew the answer. Even worse. They said humanity lacks the evolutionary complexity to understand galactic conflict. They suggested we might be better suited to farming or simple manufacturing. The irony wasn't lost on Jiho. Humanity had been unified for over 2 centuries. Now, no more wars between nations, no more conflicts over resources or religion. Earth had solved its problems and reached for the stars with one voice. Yet here they were, being lectured about conflict by species that had been trying to exterminate each other since before humans discovered fire. "Sir, incoming transmission from Earth Command," reported Communications Officer Dongwoo Lee from his station. "Put it through to my quarters," Jiho said. He needed privacy for this conversation. In his small cabin, Admiral Hyejin Kwon's face appeared on the screen. Her expression was grim, which was unusual. The Admiral was known for her calm demeanor, even in the worst situations. "Jiho, I'm afraid I have bad news. The Council has decided to recall all diplomatic missions." "Ma'am, if we just had more time—" "It's not about time," she interrupted gently. "Intelligence reports suggest both empires are planning something big, a final push that could decide the war once and for all. Civilian casualties are expected to be in the billions." Jiho felt a chill run down his spine. "Are they targeting human colonies?" "Not specifically, but we have settlements in 12 systems that could become battlegrounds. We can't risk it, so we're giving up on peace." Admiral Kwon was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder. "We're not giving up on peace, Commander. We're just changing our approach." After the transmission ended, Jiho sat alone in his quarters, staring at the star charts on his wall. Humanity had tried diplomacy for months, only to be dismissed as irrelevant. Both empires were so focused on destroying each other that they couldn't see the bigger picture. What they didn't realize was that humanity had been doing more than just talking during those 8 months. While diplomats offered peace, Human engineers had been studying every scrap of data about both civilizations. Every intercepted transmission, every tactical report, every piece of technology had been carefully analyzed and catalogued. The galaxy saw humans as weak newcomers from an insignificant star system. What they didn't know was that humanity had been watching, learning, and most importantly, preparing for what would come next. The alert came in at 0347 hours, ship time. Admiral Dae-Sung Lee was reviewing supply reports when his communications officer burst into his quarters without knocking. The young man's face was pale as death. "Sir, we just received an emergency transmission from Colony 7. Lee followed him to the bridge of the Terror's Wrath, where the main screen showed static and broken fragments of a distress call. What he heard next would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Under attack, civilian evacuation ships. Please, we have children on board." Then nothing but silence. Colony 7 had been one of humanity's newest settlements, a peaceful farming world on the edge of the war zone. 50,000 people had called it home. Families who had volunteered to build a new life on the frontier. Teachers, doctors, engineers, and their children. People who had never hurt anyone. "Get me a full report," Lee ordered, his voice steady despite the ice forming in his stomach. "Captain." Soo-Jin Han worked frantically at her station, pulling data from long-range sensors and military networks. What she found made her hands shake as she read the report aloud. A Valerian dreadnought was chasing a Coalition strike force through the system. The Coalition ships used Colony 7 as cover, hiding behind our civilian evacuation transports. Her voice cracked. The Valerian commander fired through our ships to hit his target. Lee stared at the tactical display showing the aftermath. Debris fields where evacuation ships had been. Scattered life pods drifting in space, most of them dark and cold. The Colony 7 space station was nothing but twisted metal and frozen. Atmosphere, 50,000 people, Han whispered. Gone in 30 seconds. The official response from the Valerian Empire came 6 hours later. Admiral Lee read it 3 times before he could believe what he was seeing. They called it acceptable. "Collateral damage," Han reported, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "The Valerian High Command says they regret the loss of primitive life forms, but they were pursuing legitimate military targets. They claim we shouldn't have built colonies in an active war zone." Lee felt something cold settle in his chest. These weren't soldiers who had died. These were farmers and their families, people who had been trying to build something beautiful in the darkness of space. "Sir, we're receiving another priority transmission," the communications officer announced, "from the Coalition." The news was even worse. Human diplomats Yoon-ho Choi and Yoon-ji Kang had been arrested while trying to deliver medical supplies to Coalition refugees. They had been carrying nothing but food and medicine, traveling under official diplomatic immunity. The Coalition accused them of being spies and executed them publicly as an example to other species who might interfere in their war. The footage was broadcast across Coalition space as a warning. Lee watched the recording in his private quarters. Yoon-ho had been a young man, barely 25, who had volunteered for the diplomatic corps because he believed in peace. Yoon-ji was a mother of 2 who had joined the mission to help refugee children. They died with dignity, refusing to confess to crimes they had never committed. Something fundamental changed in Admiral Lee at that moment. Something that had been building since the first rejected peace proposal, since the first mocking response from alien empires who thought humans were nothing more than amusing primitives. He called an emergency meeting of all human military commanders in the sector. Their faces appeared on screens around the conference table, officers from across the fleet who had spent months watching their diplomatic overtures fail. "They've made their choice," Lee said simply. "We offered peace. We offered mediation. We offered to help end this war that's destroying the galaxy." He paused, looking at each face on the screens. "They responded by murdering our civilians and executing our diplomats." Commander Sung-Ho Park of the Defiant spoke first. "Admiral, our orders are still to maintain neutrality." "Our orders are about to change," Lee replied. "I'm opening a channel to both empires. It's time they understood what they've done." The transmission went out on all frequencies, broadcast to every Valerian and Coalition ship in the sector. Admiral Lee stood in front of the camera, wearing his dress uniform with its simple Earth insignia. This is Admiral Dae-Sung Lee of the Terran Defense Force, speaking for the United Earth Government and all human colonies. You have killed our civilians. You have murdered our diplomats. You have rejected every offer of peace and dismissed us as irrelevant. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. You have 72 hours to cease all hostilities and surrender the individuals responsible for these war crimes to stand trial. This is not a negotiation. This is not a diplomatic request. This is your final warning. The response came within minutes from both empires. The Valyrian High Admiral actually laughed during his reply, calling humans adorable little mammals playing at war. The coalition response was even more insulting, suggesting that humans should return to their home system before they got hurt. They thought humanity's greatest weapon was their primitive technology. They were wrong. Humanity's greatest weapon was something they had never seen before in their centuries of warfare. It was their ability to unite completely when pushed beyond all reason. Every human world received the same message that night. Every colony, every ship, every settlement across human space. The message was simple. They have chosen war over peace. They have murdered our innocent. Now we choose to end this conflict permanently. What happened next would shake the galaxy. To its core, the transformation began quietly, almost invisibly. To outside observers, human space seemed unchanged after Admiral Lee's ultimatum expired. Trade ships still moved along their routes. Colony worlds continued their daily routines. The diplomatic vessels even continued their missions, though now they carried a different message. But something fundamental had shifted. On Earth, President Jin-Woo Han stood before the Global Assembly, addressing representatives from every human world. The chamber was packed with billions more watching from across the galaxy. For 300 years we have watched this war tear the galaxy apart, he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet determination. So we offered peace. We offered mediation. We offered hope. He paused, letting the weight of recent events settle over the assembly. They chose to kill our innocent and mock our efforts. Now we choose to end this war permanently. The vote was unanimous. Every representative from the oldest colonies to the newest frontier worlds agreed humanity would mobilize completely for the first time in its spacefaring history. What happened next shocked even human military commanders. Within weeks, every civilian factory began producing military equipment. Every research lab shifted to weapons development. Every mining operation prioritized strategic materials. It wasn't forced or demanded by the government. People simply chose to help. Grandmother Hae-Sun Kim, who had been knitting scarves for her grandchildren, started making equipment pouches for soldiers instead. Teenager Min Jun-yoon used his programming skills to design better targeting systems. Even children contributed, collecting recyclable materials that could be turned into ship components. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Other species fought wars with their military forces, while civilians continued normal life. Humans turned their entire civilization into a single, focused organism. But the real surprise wasn't the mobilization itself. It was what they were building. Captain. Boram Shin stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned Peacekeeper, watching her tactical display update in real time. The ship didn't look like anything in the human fleet 6 months earlier. It was sleek, efficient, and bristling with technology that seemed to bend the rules of physics. "Ma'am, we're approaching the Valyrian border," reported her navigation officer, Lieutenant Tae Hyun Song. "Signal the fleet to assume formation Beta 7, she ordered. "Remember, we're not here to conquer, we're here to end this war." Behind her, 12 other ships moved into position. Each one was different, designed for a specific purpose in what humans had started calling systematic conflict resolution. The aliens would soon learn that humanity didn't build weapons for glory or intimidation. They built them to solve problems, efficiently. The first target was Kepler Station, a massive Valyrian shipyard that had been producing warships for over a century. Intelligence reports showed it could build 50 dreadnoughts simultaneously, feeding the endless war machine. "Target their construction facilities," Captain Shin ordered. "Disable, don't destroy. We need those workers alive and those facilities intact. The Battle of Kepler Station lasted exactly 18 minutes. Human ships moved in patterns that confused Valerian defenders. Instead of the straight-line attacks both empires used, humans struck from multiple angles simultaneously, their ships working together like fingers on a hand. The Valerian commander tried traditional tactics. He launched fighters in formation, fired massive energy beams, and attempted to ram the human vessels with his heaviest ships. Nothing worked. Human ships adapted their shields in real time, changing frequency and strength based on incoming attacks. Their weapons targeted specific systems instead of trying to destroy entire vessels. Within minutes, the Valerian fleet found their engines disabled, weapons offline, and communications jammed. "Station Commander, this is Captain Shin of the Terran Defense Force," she broadcast on all frequencies. "Your military capability has been neutralized. We are sending medical teams to assist your wounded and engineering teams to prevent reactor failures. Do not resist, and no one else will be harmed." Back on Earth, General Kyung-min Park watched tactical displays from the Global Defense Center. The battle reports coming in from multiple fronts showed the same pattern. Human forces weren't fighting wars the way other species understood them. "Sir, Kepler Station has surrendered," reported Colonel In-Soo Bay. "Casualty reports show minimal losses on both sides. The station's shipyards are intact and under our control." "Good," Park replied, studying the larger strategic display. "What about the coalition fronts?" "Similar results. We've disabled 7 major military installations in the past week. Their fleets are scattered and regrouping, but they're not sure how to respond to our tactics." Park nodded, watching as human forces moved across the galaxy like a careful surgeon removing a cancer. "They fight for territory and honor," he observed to his staff. "We fight to solve problems." The difference was becoming clear to everyone, watching. Valerian and coalition forces attacked to destroy their enemies. They measured success in ships sunk and worlds conquered. Their tactics were based on centuries of glorious battle traditions. Humans approached war like engineers fixing a broken machine. They identified the components that kept the conflict running and systematically shut them down. Shipyards, supply depots, communication networks, command centers. Each target was carefully selected not to hurt the most people, but to reduce the enemy's ability to keep fighting. "Sir, we're receiving surrender offers from 3 coalition worlds," reported communications specialist Hyojin Lee. "Tell them we accept," Park replied. "Send humanitarian aid immediately and begin establishing provisional governments. No occupation forces, just peacekeepers to maintain order." The alien empires had expected humanity to fight like barbarians, using brute force and accepting massive casualties. Instead, they found themselves facing an opponent that turned war into a precise science. The first engagements weren't battles in any traditional sense. They were systematic dismantling operations, conducted with the same methodical approach humans use to solve any complex problem. And like all problems humanity set out to solve, this one would be resolved completely. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity hadn't entered the war to join it. They had entered to end it. The captured Valerian research facility on Proxima Base was unlike anything engineer So-Young Lee had ever seen. Massive crystalline structures hummed with energy, their surfaces covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The technology was centuries ahead of anything humanity had developed, yet somehow it felt wasteful and crude. "Your fusion drives are burning through fuel at twice the necessary rate," she explained to Dr. Velthor, a Valerian scientist who had been working on the base when human forces arrived. "The magnetic containment field is fighting against itself instead of working in harmony." The alien scientist stared at her with 6 eyes arranged in a perfect circle around his elongated skull. His translator device struggled with human concepts, creating an odd delay in their conversation. "You are helping me?" Velthor asked, his voice filled with confusion. "But we are enemies. You have conquered our facility." So-Young looked up from the fusion reactor schematic she had been modifying. "We're not conquerors. We're problem solvers. And right now, the problem is that your people have been using inefficient technology for centuries." She showed him the modifications on her tablet. Simple changes to the magnetic field generators, that would increase efficiency by 40% while reducing dangerous radiation by half. It was basic engineering, the kind of optimization humans learned in their first year of technical school. "This is impossible," Velthor whispered, studying the calculations. "Our greatest minds have worked on this design for millennia." "That's the problem," So Young replied gently. "You've been trying to perfect an old design instead of asking if there was a better way to do it entirely." This scene was playing out across dozens of captured facilities throughout both empires. Human engineers worked alongside alien scientists, not as captors and prisoners, but as colleagues solving technical problems. The aliens couldn't understand it. In their experience, conquerors took technology. They didn't improve it and give it back. Meanwhile, Admiral Tae-Jin Kim stood in the command center of the Unified Dawn, watching tactical displays that showed the true scope of humanity's strategy. What had started as scattered raids had evolved into something far more sophisticated. "Status report," he requested from his staff. Colonel Haiwon Jung stepped forward with her daily briefing. 17 major shipyards are now under our control. We've established humanitarian aid stations in 43 systems. Coalition and Valerian fleets are regrouping, but they're having trouble coordinating their movements. And civilian populations? Better than expected, sir. Most worlds are cooperating once they realize we're not there to harm them. We're getting requests for medical assistance and infrastructure repair from both sides. Kim nodded, studying the strategic display. The war map looked nothing like traditional conquest patterns. Instead of advancing front lines and occupied territories, human forces had created a complex web of controlled nodes. They held every major production facility, communication hub and strategic resource point across both empires. "Sir, incoming priority transmission," announced communications specialist Dongmin Park. "It's from the Valerian High Command and Coalition Central Authority. Joint transmission." Kim raised an eyebrow. In 300 years of warfare, both empires had never cooperated on anything. "Put it through." The main screen divided to show two very different alien faces. High Admiral Kethvar of the Valerians looked like a warrior carved from stone, his features sharp and predatory. Supreme Coordinator Hixner of the Coalition resembled a graceful insect, her movements fluid and precise. "Admiral Kim," Kethvar began, his voice dripping with forced politeness. "We wish to discuss terms." "Terms for what?" Kim asked, though he already knew the answer. "An alliance," Hixner replied, her compound eyes reflecting light in patterns that showed agitation. "Our empires have agreed to set aside our differences to address the human situation." Kim almost smiled. "The human situation? Your species has proven more capable than we initially estimated," Kethvar admitted reluctantly. "We propose a joint effort to restore the previous balance of power." "In exchange for what?" Both aliens looked uncomfortable. "Complete withdrawal from our territories," Hixner said. "Return to your home system. We will guarantee safe passage." "And non-aggression pacts." Kim looked at his staff. Several officers were struggling not to laugh. The two empires that had been trying to exterminate each other for centuries were now offering humanity safe passage to go home, as if humans were tourists who had overstayed their welcome. "I'm afraid that's not possible," Kim replied diplomatically. "We didn't come here to visit. We came here to end the war." "Then what do you want?" Kethvar demanded, his warrior's pride finally showing through his diplomatic mask. "Unconditional surrender of all military forces, war crimes tribunals for leadership responsible for civilian deaths, complete disarmament of both empires, reconstruction efforts for all damaged worlds, and establishment of a permanent peacekeeping authority to prevent future conflicts." The silence that followed was deafening. Both alien leaders stared at Kim, as if he had just asked them to tear down the stars. "That's impossible," Hixner finally said. "You're asking us to cease existing as sovereign powers." "No," Kim corrected. "I'm asking you to exist as civilized powers. There's a difference." The transmission ended abruptly. Within hours, intelligence reports confirmed what Kim had expected. Both empires were mobilizing every remaining ship, calling back deep space patrols, and preparing for a final desperate assault on human positions. It was too late. Over the past months, human forces had systematically dismantled the infrastructure that made large-scale warfare possible. Shipyards were disabled, supply depots were controlled, communication networks were monitored. The grand alliance between ancient enemies would have to fight with whatever ships they could scrape together. "Sir, we're receiving multiple surrender requests," Colonel Jung reported the next morning. "Individual ship commanders, planetary governors, even some system-wide authorities. They're asking for terms." Kim looked at the tactical display. Red, markers showed the remaining enemy fleets, scattered and outnumbered. Blue markers showed human positions, a stable network of controlled points that had effectively ended the war without a final battle. "Standard terms for all requests," he replied. "War crimes tribunals for leaders who ordered attacks on civilians. Protection and aid for everyone else. Full reconstruction assistance for damaged worlds." "Sir, that's going to cost us enormous resources," pointed out Fleet Engineer Subin Cho. "Less than fighting them would cost," Kim replied. "And much less than letting this war continue." The galaxy was learning that humanity didn't fight wars to win them. They fought wars to solve the problems that caused them in the first place. And like all problems humanity decided to solve, this one would be resolved completely, permanently, and with the least possible harm to everyone involved. The age of endless galactic warfare was ending, not with a climactic battle, but with the quiet efficiency of a species that simply refused to accept that peace was impossible. The morning sun rose over New Valeria for the first time in 3 years. Director Jun Wuan stood on the balcony of the temporary command center, watching construction crews work to rebuild the capital city. Where once there had been rubble and twisted metal, now there were new buildings rising from the ground. Human engineers worked alongside Valerian architects, creating something that honored the past while embracing a peaceful future. "Director, the medical supply convoy has arrived," reported his assistant, Lieutenant Chan Ho Kim. "Dr. Hyojin Park wants to know where to set up the field hospital." "Tell her to use the old government plaza," An replied. "It's the most central location, and the symbolism will be good for morale." 2 years had passed since humanity entered the Galactic War, 2 years since Admiral Lee's ultimatum expired and human forces began their systematic campaign. Now, instead of occupying conquered territory, humans were rebuilding it. The transformation had been remarkable. Valerian Prime, once the military heart of a warrior empire, was becoming something entirely new. The weapon factories had been converted to produce medical equipment and farming tools. The military academies were being turned into schools for engineering and medicine. The massive statues of ancient war heroes were being replaced with monuments to peace. It wasn't happening just on Valerian Prime. Across both former empires, human reconstruction fleets were arriving at devastated worlds. They brought food, medicine, building materials, and most importantly, hope. Former Coalition General Vextar watched human engineers install a new water purification system in his city. The insectoid warrior had once commanded fleets that could level planets. Now he was learning to be a civil administrator, helping to coordinate relief efforts. "I don't understand," he said to Dr. Hyojin Park, who was overseeing the medical mission on his world. "You defeated us completely. You could rule us, exploit our resources, enslave our people. Why are you helping us instead?" Dr. Park looked up from her medical scanner, which she was using to check radiation levels in the local water supply. She was a small woman, barely reaching Vextar's shoulder, but her eyes held a determination that the general had learned to respect. "Because the war is over," she replied simply. "Now we fix what was broken. But we were your enemies. We killed your people." "Some of your leaders killed our people," Park corrected gently. "Most of your people were just trying to survive a war they didn't start. Those leaders are facing trial. Everyone else deserves a chance to build something better." This philosophy was being applied across the galaxy. The war crimes tribunals were proceeding fairly but firmly. Military leaders who had ordered attacks on civilians were being held accountable. But ordinary soldiers, workers, and citizens were being treated as victims of the conflict, not perpetrators. On Earth, President Minna Song prepared for the most important speech of her career. In 1 hour, she would address the first meeting of the Reformed Galactic Council, representing not just humanity, but dozens of species that had been affected by the 3-century war. "Madam President, the delegates are assembled," announced her Chief of Staff Secretary Won Jin Lee. The council chamber had been built in neutral space, far from any single world's influence. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the circular amphitheater, their diverse forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. At the center sat the human delegation, small in number, but carrying enormous responsibility. President Song rose to address the assembly. Her words would be translated into thousands of languages and broadcast across the galaxy. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustics. "We gather today not as conquerors and conquered, but as neighbors working toward a shared future." She paused, looking around the chamber at faces both familiar and alien. Some showed curiosity, others suspicion, many showed hope. 2 years ago, humanity entered a war that had consumed the galaxy for 3 centuries. We were told that peace was impossible, that some conflicts could never be resolved. We refused to accept that answer. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The story of humanity's involvement in the war had become legend across the galaxy, but hearing it from their leader gave it new weight. "We didn't come to conquer. We came to end the killing. We didn't come to rule. We came to heal." Today, I'm proud to announce the establishment of the Galactic Peacekeeping Authority with representatives from every species, dedicated to ensuring that such a war never happens again. The applause was thunderous, lasting several minutes. When it finally died down, President Song continued, "The authority will be neutral in all disputes. It will have the power to mediate conflicts, provide humanitarian aid, and when necessary, intervene to protect civilian populations. Its goal is not to control the galaxy, but to keep it peaceful." Former enemies were now working together on the authority's council. Valerian honor guards stood beside coalition diplomats, their ancient hatred replaced by shared purpose. The key transition hadn't been easy, but it was working. Captain Bo-Ram Shin, now Admiral of the Peacekeeping Fleet, oversaw the new order from her flagship, the Harmony Restored. Her ships patrolled trade routes, responded to emergencies, and served as neutral ground for diplomatic meetings. They were no longer weapons of war, but tools of peace. "Admiral, we're receiving a distress call from the Rigel system," reported her navigation officer. "Pirates are attacking civilian shipping. Set course for Rigel," Shin ordered, "and contact the local authorities. We'll handle the immediate threat, but they need to address the underlying causes that create piracy." This was the new way. Violence was met with appropriate force, but always with an eye towards solving the root problems that caused conflict in the first place. The galaxy had learned something profound about humanity in those 2 years. Their true strength wasn't their technology or their military tactics. It was their absolute refusal to accept that some problems couldn't be solved. Peace wasn't just possible, it was inevitable once humanity decided to make it happen. The age of endless galactic warfare had ended, not through conquest or domination, but through the quiet determination of a species that treated war as simply another problem to be solved. And like all problems humanity set out to solve, this one had been resolved completely, permanently, and with the greatest possible benefit for everyone involved.